Welcome to the Sin Bin Podcast, your home for all the news, analysis, and discussion around your Bloomington Bison.
Let's drop the puck and get started.
Welcome back to the Sin Bin Podcast. I'm Dylan Skeen here with Michael Eganhouse. We are here for episode 7 today. We have a lot to talk about on the first episode of the Sin Bin Only podcast. We got a ton of stuff that we're changing right now, Mike. We got a new logo. We got a new section. It's just going to be Bison now on the Sin Bin podcast. So exciting stuff here. Changes on the channel, but we'll just get right into it for the first episode of the Bison Only Sin Bin podcast. And we'll start with this past week. The first game against Fort Wayne. It was the Education Day game. Mike, what do you have to say about that game? Because I got a lot to say about that game.
Well, number one, we should have won that game.
We should have won that game. 100%. 100%.
I'm not going to say that it was a bad mistake, but I'm going to say that it was a bad mistake. Carter Berger, not the greatest, but you know what? He's been our best, one of our probably top 3 players all year, so we can't harp on him too much. But it was definitely one that I felt that we should have won, and especially you're not going to get a crowd like that probably ever more than once a year. So
yeah, it was, I'll be honest, that was a little deflating. I mean, the kids there were deflated a little bit too. Like, it was just, they honestly were doing really good. They got outshot for like the majority of the game. I mean, actually, going into the third, they actually had the lead in shots only by 1. But then in the third, they got outshot 14-9 and let up that final goal. It was so brutal because they didn't let the first goal in. They did let the first goal in. Excuse me. But then they immediately scored like back-to-back within 2 minutes of each other in the first. Crowd was hyped, all good, up 2-1. Fort Wayne ties it in the second. Bison get it back in the second. And it seems like it's going to go all good. Start of the third, almost immediate goal by Fort Wayne. It was pretty deflating, just coming out immediately and getting scored on. But it was still very competitive throughout that third. There was a lot of different chances on either side. And then that Jack Duggan goal, yeah, that was...
I mean, that was kind of the theme for this week's games, where it was just like, you know, trading momentum. I felt like it was like we would get ahead, but then we'd let them back, and then we'd get ahead, and I mean, luckily,
lots of back and forth.
We were able to pull out the next 2. But I mean, my goodness, if you want your heart rate to go up and stress level to go up, this was the week of Bison hockey for you, because wow, it was like, come on, guys.
No, absolutely. I mean, that comment, it was just they should have won that game. They really, that one was just one that, like, you look back at the end of the season, and if you end up not making the playoffs, this is a game you look back on and go, oh, especially if you like miss it by like 2 points or even 1 point. Like, man, just that game was so close. It's just one of those ones that you let get away. I was at the game, and I actually went to the bathroom during the third period, and I just hear the crowd. It was during that like 14 minutes. I just hear the crowd go, "Oh!" And I'm like, "No, they didn't score. No." Because you could just tell that Fort Wayne had the momentum in the third. I mean, again, they outshot 14-9, and they had the more high danger shots. I don't know if I can really find a lot of statistics on high danger versus low danger shots in the ECHL, but I would say they definitely had the majority of the high danger shots in that third period as well. And it was just, they took momentum back in that third, and it was brutal. They were pushing, the Bison were pushing, but weren't able to get that tying goal at the end or just any goal in the third. And I don't know. That's when you let get away. But enough from the negatives, because yes, that game was really frustrating. But the good thing about a really deflating, frustrating game is that you come out the next game fired up, and you don't want to do that again. And it seemed like it was going to be the exact same story in that second game when I was watching it, because you scored the first goal and then you let them score just with 20 seconds left in the second, and then they come out and score again in like halfway through the third, and you're like, it's over.
Yeah.
Like, me personally, I was like, I don't want to believe it, but like it just felt like it was over. They only got 1 goal the entire game. Like it felt just brutal. And then Gavin Gould at the very end of that third period, just 44 seconds left, one-timer snipe by Gavin Gould. I mean, I don't know if you saw that. That was fantastic because what I'm pretty sure what happened on that goal was Chong-Min Lee was trying to throw it in front of the net because there was someone right there, and he got his stick lifted. So it just kept going. Just so happens that Gavin Gould's right there.
Right time, right place, right
and
there.
And that's what good players do. They get in the right place at the right time. He just fires it home, and sure enough, tie it up in the very end. And then Carter Berger making up for his mistake in the previous game. It's so cathartic to have like the person who made the mistake that ended up not letting you go to OT the previous game, then score the OT winner in that game. I'm sure that had to be so cathartic for Berger.
I mean, it was great to see, and when that happened, I just kept thinking in my head, like, you know, a little part of me was like, all right, you got to feel for the dude, especially after the mistake, but before he scored the game winner. But you just got to feel for the dude because how many times have we talked about it in the last, like, 2 weeks? I mean, this kid is going up and down and up and down, and then he's playing at 2 different levels so often. I mean, it's got to be so hard to switch. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't switch his play style, but the speed of the game, I'm sure, is way different in the ECHL than the AHL. And, I mean, this kid has been up and down so many times within the last month.
Oh, my gosh. We were talking about it on the last episode. It was like he got called up and sent down and called up and sent down. And I'm like,
I don't know how he does it.
I said last week, just give us Carter Berger. Just let us if you're not going to use him and just go, play yo-yo with him between the ECHL and the... I'm like, just let him, because he's our... debatably, I mean, offensively, definitely our best defenseman. Defensively, I would argue that's Jake Murray. Jake Murray has been just a steady presence on that blue line all year. And especially without him getting called up once, like, he's just been a perfect, steady defensive, but not that he can't produce his own offense, but just that steady defensive defenseman that you need. And I'm glad that we got Jake Murray and Carter Berger now, because it's like, okay, we finally have those two. I'd still like to have a couple of the people from Hartford back, but whatever. Not the point.
We've scored a couple of power play goals too since Berger's been back, and I know that's something that you've been harping on a lot is Berger running that power play. And I think, if you've watched the games closely, we've noticed a difference on the power play as soon as he came back. So
I mean, there's definitely been guys who have stepped up. Like I talked about Staudiker in the past. He stepped up. Someone like Thomas Stewart also big stepped up once a lot of guys were gone. But I mean, you just can't get around the fact that Carter Berger is that power play quarterback.
And some guys are just not replaceable in their roles.
Exactly. It's just one of those like roles that it's really hard to fill. It's the same thing with like your number one PKer. Like if you have that steady defensive defenseman that you always have, Jake Murray, that's like your guy on the penalty kill or something like that, then it's going to be a lot harder to make that up if they get called up or sent away or leave for overseas, which is all things that have happened to Bison defensemen this year. Also, a fun fact about that game, OT winner, Chong-Min Lee had an assist, not just an assist, but a primary assist on all 3 goals.
What a guy.
In that game.
What a guy.
What a guy.
Gotta love Chong-Min Lee.
Oh, absolutely. I'm pretty sure it was for the next game, but he got first star on the next game, and he got interviewed for the first star on the bench, and he's like, what does this mean for you guys going for a playoff spot? He's like, we're gonna make the playoffs. Fuck yeah. And like had to like pause for a second, and it's like, I don't think I could say that on the hot mic. It was so funny to be there. Oh man, what a guy. I mean, he's a fan favorite for a reason. Like he's
if you get interviews like that, you become even more.
Oh my god, exactly. Because it's a thing that's in hockey a lot. that you notice, especially in higher levels too, but like it's sometimes really hard to find personality in the NHL. Like you think about like, I mean, I think it's honestly a bit easier in the coast just because the rules are a little bit lax compared to like the NHL. But like think of any interview you have with like NHLers. They're like, yeah, puck's in deep. Like you gotta, it's the same. Exactly. And I get it. Like their job is to play hockey. It's not to be a media personality. But like for a game that's trying to grow and a game that gets constantly disrespected when it's talking about the top 4 sports in North America, like hockey is one of the 4. And I'm tired of people saying that it's 3 with basketball, football, and baseball. I'm like, no, hockey's up there. Personally, I'd say hockey's number 1, but that's a debate for another time. But in a sport that gets, again, disrespected like that all the time, it's because of, honestly, the personalities. Like, you think of basketball, names come to mind immediately. Russell Westbrook, LeBron James. Like, I don't even watch basketball in the NBA at all. But I still know the top tier guys. I know Jokic. I know, and I know that because of the media personalities they have. Football, easy as well. Any team has a couple guys who are outspoken and fun. And in baseball, I'm not sure, but I also don't follow baseball like at all. And I'm sure they have some good personalities there as well. So with the NHL, a big thing, just hockey in general, a big thing is to have those guys with personality. And Chung-Min Lee, the story behind him, the personality of the guy, he's just, I mean, it's great to have a guy like that to gather interest in the sport. And, I mean, I don't know. Well, it's just great.
And it's not even like, I mean, the fans enjoy it, obviously. It's good for the fan base and everything. But even just, like, for the guys inside the locker room, like, you want to talk about locker room chemistry and just having guys inside the locker room, not even just for the fans. Like, I'm sure that having Chung-Min Lee in that locker room, I mean, if I were one of the guys, I don't think I could not smile in front of that guy. He probably just brings out the best in those guys, and I think that's not only good for the fans, but just good for the team morale.
Absolutely. Well, we'll go into the last game here for the Bison. Another game against the Heartlanders, rival game, and oh man, you needed a good weekend, especially after losing that Education Day game. We talked about it last week, how the standings are so close now, and you basically needed a win, and well, they got it. And sure enough, who scores the final goal but Chung-Min Lee? Like, it was just, and especially that second game was, or not the second game, I should say third game, but the second game against the Heartlanders, I really feel like the team's going to take a step forward after that game because it was one of the biggest full team efforts I've seen out of the Bison all year. Because again, we talked about last game, Chung-Min Lee, a primary assist on all of the 3 goals, and that's great. He's a great player, but you can't have one person running your entire offense. You're just not going to succeed that way. So when you talk about this game, they go down by 1 in the first, don't score anything else in the first, and they go down by 2 early in the second, and then you fight back. And the people who scored, Lou Felix Denis, the person who was just brought over on a great one-timer, then they go up by 2 again, scored, and like, you think most teams might, like, you know, they're fighting back, they're down 2, they get 1 back, and then they immediately go down 3-1. Like,
that's pretty deflating.
It's deflating. Not even 30 seconds later, Max Neal comes back, brings it right back within 1, and then 4 minutes after that, Danny Kadek. And these are people who are all throughout your lineup. Danny Kadek is absolutely top 6. Max Neal is like your bottom pair guy, or not bottom pair, bottom line, like 4th line grinder kind of guy. The first goal was again by Lou Felix Denis. Gavin Gould scored that. It's just like you get it from all around the lineup. It wasn't like one guy who really. That's why Chung-Min Lee got the first star of that game, is because there wasn't one guy that scored a ton or had like 4 assists or something like that. It was just he scored the last goal, so he got the first star because everybody else pitched in. And it feels really good to have like a full team effort and really come together as a team. And like, again, Lou Felix Denis, goal and assist, like he's 21. Like he's only going to get better. And that trade looks really good for
I was gonna just say
the Bison already.
Coach Barsky made the right move there.
Barsky has made some really good trades this year to help out the team. I gotta call it out because again he traded for Denis, he traded for Bykov, and those two are basically top 6 like forwards for you now. Like I don't know. It's just
also traded for somebody named Robidoux.
We haven't talked about that. I can't believe I skipped over this. So pretty sure it was the first game. Let me check my stats here really quick, but I'm pretty darn sure it was the first out of the 2 games. Yes, it was. Yeah, it was the first. And oh man. So end of the first period, all right? So obviously these two teams do not like each other at all. Just look back at the Eddie game. If you don't know how much these two hate each other, just watch the interview with Eddie Matsushima on our channel and skip to the part where I ask him what his least favorite team is. It's immediate. It's Iowa. No question about it. We talked.
Here's why.
And here's why. End of the first. I mean, Blotchman's been doing his thing. He's been getting under the skin. Robidoux hops over the boards after the period ends and just let's go. Let's go. And I mean, yes, you shouldn't hop over the boards. Obviously, you're gonna get a suspension for it. But
that's exactly what we brought him here to do. Not hop over the boards, but we needed an enforcer bad.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what he was brought here to do, and that's what he did.
Oh, man, that fight between him and Blotchman, if you haven't seen that clip of the fight, it was unironically one of the best hockey fights I've ever seen. And Robidoux just lays into him at the end, just starts, throwing him. He lands on top of him. And so, fight's over. Refs are trying to break it up. Blotchman gets up and throws a sucker punch after the fight's already over, ends up hitting a ref. And listen, I get it. You're trying to stay in the league. You're an enforcer. It's your job. But throwing a sucker punch after the fight is over is pretty classless. I'm gonna call it out for what it is. That's pretty classless. And not even him hitting the ref. I mean, that's a whole nother thing that you've now hit an official. But there is, people talk about it a lot, but there is a code in hockey, and the players, the code, people follow. There is an unwritten code in hockey at any level you have, and that is not in it. You cannot be throwing a sucker punch after the fight's already over. Yeah, Blotchman, you lost. It sucks, but you live to fight another day. You've won plenty of other fights, dude. It's your whole deal. You really gotta throw a sucker punch because you lost a fight? I don't know. I remember I texted you after that happened because I was heated. I was heated after I saw that. I was losing. I'm like, that's ridiculous. You can't, I don't know. I just think that's pretty classless, and for a team that I was already pretty against, I still respected Blotchman. I said I don't like you because, you're basically the enforcer for our main rival, but I respect what you do as a player. After that, no. I don't have any respect for doing something like that. It crosses the line, but we still won the fight. So, and the game, and both games. So, who's laughing now, Blotchman? Who's laughing now, huh? Both of them are going to be suspended. It's Blotchman's 3rd suspension of the season. And he leads the entire league in penalty minutes with 219, which is just hilarious. He's an enforcer, but come on, dude. Leading the league with 219 penalty minutes is hilarious. So, there's a reason why the Heartlanders, I'm looking at their stats right now. The second highest penalty minutes for a team in the Central Division is the Fuel, actually, with 779. First is the Heartlanders with over 1,000.
Oh, my Lord. It is, and I guarantee you that most of those have been in our games.
Probably a good amount have been in our games, because I know for sure the majority of our penalty minutes are probably from the Heartlanders games.
Ridiculous how many penalty minutes we have against them.
Oh, absolutely.
It's insane. And you want to talk about, meaningful games, penalty minutes, all of that. I mean, those two Iowa games were super meaningful. And
Absolutely.
I again went to the coaches show.
Nice.
If you haven't been to one, I suggest you go to one at McGuire's Pub. It's actually really fun. Coach Messier was there.
Beer and hockey. What more could you possibly want?
There's nothing better than that. Coach Messier was there, and he was talking about, somebody had asked a question based on, what is the mood like around the team or whatever, and he said they want meaningful games, and they've talked about it all year. They want meaningful games. Well, guess what? You're getting meaningful games. They're getting exactly what they asked for.
Well, they got them this past weekend, definitely meaningful games against Iowa. And coming up, we talked about the standings a little bit, or not a little bit. We talked about it a lot last week. Talked about it a little bit so far here today, but they're better now after a good weekend for the Bison. They're not tied anymore, but it's still real close. The Cyclones have the same amount of games played as the Bison and are only 2 points back. The Fuel and Wings both have one game in hand on the Bison and are only 1 point below them. So games against the Wings and Fuel are absolute must-wins.
And we have a lot of those coming
And we
up.
have a good amount. We have game against the Wings on the 21st of March, game against the Fuel on the 22nd. The one against the Wings is at home, and the one against the Fuel is away. Then you have a game against the Wings on April 5th, another game against the Wings on the 6th. Both of those are at home. And then you have a makeup game on the 9th against the Fuel. And I remember earlier in the season when the Wings were doing pretty bad, thinking of that's pretty good that we have some Wings games down the stretch so we can get some extra points for a playoff push. Now it's you have to win those games if you want to get into a playoff push. But the lucky part is, yes, both of the games against the Fuel are away, but you have a very solid track record against the Fuel so far this year, which is pretty darn good. The Wings games, all three are at home. The 21st one, the April 5th, and April 6th, all are at home.
Get your tickets.
Yeah. You want meaningful games. You want to come watch a meaningful Coast game. Go to the Wings games because I guarantee half of those games are probably for a playoff spot at that point. So, those are going to be huge, and that doesn't even bring up the fact of how many just hard games we have in this league. I'm going to look up the league leaders in points right now.
Our remaining schedule is I would venture to say it's probably in the top half of the toughest schedule left.
Oh yeah,
I mean it is ridiculous how hard it's going to be.
I mean the Walleye have, when I say fallen off a little bit, they've won 4 in a row, so they haven't really fallen off at all. But comparatively, they're not at the top of they're at the top of their conference, but they're only 4th in the entire league. The East is a little bit better right now than the West, with the Everblades, Stingrays, and Lions. But the Tulsa Oilers are 7th in the league right now. The Comets are 8th, and the Walleye are 4th. So those are all in the top 4th of the entire league. And looking at the schedule, you have, I forgot about the Nailers too. The Wheeling Nailers, they've fallen off a little bit. They were near the top of it, but they're only 12th now. But looking at the upcoming games, you have those games obviously against the Wings and stuff that are going to be huge. But then you have 3 games in a row this weekend, all against the Oilers, who are 7th in the league. They are all at home, but that's a tough team, and you need to win some of those games. So then you have the Wings and Fuel game. Then you have a game against the Walleye away. Then you have a home game or a flip-flop against home and then away against the Comets on the 28th, 29th. And then you're away at the Wheeling Nailers, who are not they're 12th. They were better at the beginning of the year. Then you have a home game against the Walleye again. Those 2 games I talked about against the Wings, then the Fuel game, then 2 more Comets games, and that's your entire schedule. That's the rest of the year. So literally every game is either a must-win against a admittedly easier opponent, or a not must-win, but again, But you got to get points here because you're in this playoff race, and they're all against really hard teams. So we were just talking about it. You want to talk about meaningful games? All of them. All of the ones now are meaningful at this point. There's not a single game that you can take off at this point and be like, okay, well, if we lose this, it's whatever. It's at this point, with how close the standings are, with how hard the opponents are going to be, like, all of them are must-wins at this point. I mean, you only have 16 games left in the season.
Like 500 at minimum.
At minimum.
At minimum, you got to go 500. And I don't even think you make the playoffs if you go 500.
I don't think so either. If you go 500, I mean, someone like the Wings have been on fire as of late. So, like, you gotta... yeah, it's going to be a tough stretch for the Bison. But, this is make or break time. I mean, this is... if they don't make the playoffs, then they don't deserve to be in the playoffs. And that sounds like well, no doy. But, like, this is put up or shut up. Yep. Like... These are all going to be hard games. They're all against either hard opponents or against must-win teams. So again, this is put up or shut up. This is where you prove, are you a playoff team or are you an first-year team that still needs a little bit of time before they're ready? And with how Chongmin Lee was talking, they want to make the playoffs. All right, they want to bring this team to the playoffs. And let me tell you, especially for this area, that'd be huge. I just saw recently, like. Again, the Bison went out and did something earlier. I saw it on their story today where they went to an elementary school, and all those kids were so hyped. And that was in, oh man, where was it? It was Carlock. So it's like a solid 15 minutes away from here. So it's like central Illinois at this point is for this team, all right? Because, I mean, there's the Hawks and I guess the Blues closer to central Illinois with East St. Louis and stuff. But, like, you want to talk about a central Illinois team, most people in this area, this is their first experience with a hockey team. Yep. Or even sometimes a sports team in general. Like, so people are hyped. You make the playoffs this year, that could be huge for the Bison, both in just like ticket sales and also just the overall morale of the team. So I'm excited to see how these last couple weeks play out.
I stand by my statement that I made last week. I still think they're going to squeak in.
You think they're just going to barely?
I think they're going to squeak in. I think they're going to find a way to do it.
I hope so. I'm crossing my fingers. I really hope so.
As long as we don't get anybody, as long as we don't have this up and down type of thing that we've had this last month with players going up and down, I think we'll be all right because I think we're finally I think we're starting to settle down and be like, all right, we're figuring out who we have.
Yep. And
we don't want any more changes. Speaking of that, real quick, I just want to point this out because I heard somebody talking about it. But for those of you who don't know or may not realize why we had so many changes, a lot of that depends on the Rangers, our NHL team. So if you want to see who might be moving up or down from our team, look at the Rangers' injuries because that is really dependent. Because if the Rangers have to call up from the AHL,
then the AHL is going to call up from the ECHL, and we're going to lose more people. That also is true for Carolina because remember we do have a couple Hurricanes players because we are also affiliated with the Wolves. So if the Hurricanes call up people from the Wolves, they might want to call up someone. I think, actually, now that Montgomery is up, I think that might be all of our Hurricanes. But no, Yaniv Peretz. Peretz
was so.
Well, I will say one thing though. I was really worried that game that Kaskasuo started. I was like, oh no, this is an incredibly meaningful game, and we're putting in our backup. Oh man. Did I get shut up right away? Because Peretz, I don't want to give him any smack, but he's had more rough games of recently. Let's be real here. I mean, he was putting up a .935, and he's been letting in three plus goals in the last couple games that he's been in. And I'm not gonna fault him. He's definitely stolen games for the Bison this year, but to know that this backup that you just signed that you were kind of worried about, and then puts up a really good game in a big, meaningful game, that's huge for, again, morale and also just confidence in your goaltenders. Because I'm now very confident in both goaltenders. If Peretz can, just tighten up a little bit from where he was earlier in the season, you have a fantastic goalie duo, which is insane for a team that's had multiple goalies leave them this year.
Well, and I mean, they always talk about it, but your goaltender has to be your best player sometimes.
Sometimes, especially in the playoffs.
And especially in the playoffs, right? And they've shown that. I think Kaskasuo with the games that he had, recently, I think they've shown that if our defense, doesn't have the best performance or we don't put up a lot of goals, our goaltenders can win for us.
Absolutely. And the biggest thing is, remember, those goalies are big in the playoffs because you make one extra save can be the difference between a win and a loss. So especially a goalie that might have a track record of like a championship win. I mean, I wouldn't know of any, like maybe there was a goaltender who was on Quinnipiac who won a national championship. I mean, if we had someone like that on the team, that would be really good like playoff experience to have. Oh wait, we do. So yeah, I'm pretty excited. It's a, you've said it multiple times this year. Once you make the playoffs, anything can happen. And especially when you have a good goaltender like Yaniv Peretz, anything can happen.
That's what I'm saying. I'm still saying they squeak in, but all you got to do is squeak in.
Yeah.
Squeak in, and
then from there it's
whatever might happen.
The standing, nobody cares how many points you had in the regular season the second the playoffs start. As soon as the playoffs start, nobody cares. Like,
it's 0-0 at that point.
Yep.
And I feel like when I watch like the NHL playoffs, you could, who was it though? I think it was the Boston Bruins, maybe one year. They had the best record.
Oh, you're talking about 2023, the best regular season of all time.
Got knocked out.
And got knocked out in the first round by the Florida Panthers.
So, records don't mean you know what.
There's the last time, I mean, this is more NHL again, but still, the last time a President's Trophy winner, so the league's best team, won the Stanley Cup was 2013 with the Chicago Blackhawks. So, again, regular season matters for the playoff seeding, but once it's the playoffs, it's 0-0. Yeah. It only matters for who you're going to face. Once you're facing that team, everything goes out the window.
Bison can be the 4th seed, and they still might win the Kelly Cup.
Exactly. I mean, their first round matchup is going to be against the Walleye, so it's going to be okay, if you're going to win, you're going to win. Like, you got it. And again, I talked about this a couple weeks ago, too, but I would prefer that, honestly, because then in the first round, it's like, all right, like, if you can beat this team, then you can go far. If you can't, then you don't go anywhere. Like, and I would much prefer to have the hard games automatically, because don't give me a cakewalk. Nobody wins the playoffs, and if they have a cakewalk schedule, because they're not going to have a cakewalk forever. And you have easy games, and then you go into hard games.
And I think the end of our regular season schedule is advantageous for that too.
Exactly.
I mean, we got hard games in the regular season. If we can end this year by playing well in those games, squeak in the playoffs, oh boy, look out.
Anything can happen.
Look out.
Anything can happen. Well, that's about it for the Bison here today. This is the end of the episode, end of episode 7 for the Sin Bin podcast. Thank you guys for joining us. Today, another series will be started as well, so make sure to check out the Sin Bin podcast channel. We might have to rename the channel in general to like maybe Sin Bin Studios or something like that, so we can keep putting out multiple podcasts now. But yeah, we will have another podcast talking about the rest of the stuff we had talked about in previous weeks. But if you want to watch that, that'll be out around the same time as this episode. If not, thank you for listening. That's all for this episode, and we'll see you on the next one.